My hands were steady as I reviewed the patient's chart, but my blood ran cold when I read the name, Brittany Cole. 10 years ago, she destroyed my reputation and forced me to flee this town. But today, she is helpless on my operating table, and I am the only one who can save her. The sterile air of the operating room usually brought me a sense of calm. It was a controlled environment, a place where logic, skill, and anatomy dictated the outcome, not popularity contests or the size of a bank account. But looking down at the unconscious woman intubated on the table, the calm fractured. Beneath the blue surgical drapes, the face was older, perhaps a bit hardened by the decade that had passed, but it was undeniably her. Brittany Cole, the girl who had once stood atop the cafeteria table, leading the chant that had finally broken my spirit. "Dr. Rodriguez?" The voice snapped me back to the present. I looked up to see Joseph Kim, my lead anesthesiologist and perhaps the only person in this hospital I considered a friend, watching me with concern over his mask. His dark eyes were narrowed, reading the tension in my shoulders. "Vitals are stable, Gianna," Joseph said, his voice calm and grounding. "We are ready when you are. The trauma to the spleen is significant. If we don't proceed now, she won't make it to the recovery room." I took a deep breath, forcing the memories of lockers slamming and cruel laughter back into the dark recesses of my mind. I was not that frightened 16-year-old girl anymore. I was Dr. Gianna Rodriguez, the newly appointed chief of surgery at St. Jude's Memorial, and I had a job to do. "Scalpel," I said, my voice firm. The surgery was complex. Brittany had been in a severe car accident, a collision that had shattered her ribs and caused massive internal bleeding. For 4 hours, the world outside the OR ceased to exist. There was only the rhythm of the heart monitor, the precise movements of my hands, and the clipped exchanges of data between Joseph and me. I repaired the damage with a precision that I had spent 10 years perfecting. I stitched, I cauterized, and I saved the life of the woman who had once told me the world would be better off if I'd just disappeared. When I finally stepped away from the table, peeling off my blood-stained gloves, I felt a strange cocktail of exhaustion and triumphs. I had held her life in my hands. I could have hesitated, I could have let my hand tremble, but I hadn't. "Excellent work, doctor," Joseph said as we scrubbed out. The water was hot, scalding almost, but it felt good. That was a mess. Most surgeons wouldn't have been able to save the spleen. "She's lucky I was on call," I murmured, drying my hands. "Do you know her?" Joseph asked quietly. He was perceptive, perhaps too perceptive. I looked at him in the reflection of the mirror.
"I used to, a long time ago, before I was Dr. Rodriguez." "Well," Joseph said, tossing his towel into the bin, "she owes you her life. Let's hope she's grateful." I almost laughed. Gratitude was not a currency people like Brittany Cole dealt in. But the real problem wasn't Brittany. As I walked down the pristine white hallway toward the recovery wing, I knew that saving Brittany was only the beginning. Brittany was just a symptom of the disease that plagued this town. The root of the infection was someone else. And, as if summoned by my dread, I turned the corner to the surgical ICU waiting area and saw him. Zachary Booker. He was standing by the nurses' station, looking as if he owned the building. In many ways, he probably did. He was wearing a suit. His posture was arrogant, leaning over the counter, berating a young nurse who looked like she was about to cry. Zachary Booker, the king of the high school, the boy who had taken Brittany's rumors and weaponized them, the one who had made sure my family was evicted from our rental home. He hadn't changed, not really. He had just grown taller, richer, and crueler. I smoothed my white coat, checked the ID badge that read Chief of Surgery, and walked toward him. "Is there a problem here?" I asked, projecting the authority of my station. Zachary spun around. His eyes, the color of ice, scanned me up and down. There was no recognition. Why would there be? The last time he saw me, I was wearing oversized thrift store clothes, hiding behind messy hair and thick glasses. Now I stood in tailored scrubs and a white coat, my hair pulled back in a severe professional bun exuding power. "Finally," Zachary sneered. "Are you the one in charge? I've been demanding an update on my fiancé for 20 minutes. This incompetence is staggering. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Booker," I said coldly, "and I suggest you lower your voice. This is a hospital, not a boardroom." He blinked, taken aback by my tone. He wasn't used to being spoken to this way. "My fiancée, Brittany Cole. Is she alive?" "She is. The surgery was successful. She is currently in recovery and will be moved to the ICU shortly. However, she needs rest, and she certainly does not need her fiancé screaming at the medical staff." Zachary stepped closer, invading my personal space. It was an intimidation tactic he had used in the hallways of our high school. It didn't work on me anymore. "Listen to me," he hissed. "I am the chairman of the donor committee. I practically built this wing. If I want to scream, I will scream. And if you want to keep your job, you will ensure Brittany gets the presidential suite and round-the-clock private nursing. I don't want any of your residents touching her, only the chief." "I am the chief," I said simply. He paused, looking at my badge.
If you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. Also, please comment, as your feedback helps to improve the stories coming.
You? You look like you're fresh out of school. Dr. Rodriguez, I corrected him, and regardless of your donations, Mr. Booker, medical protocol applies to everyone. Brittany will receive the best care because that is what we provide to every patient. Now please step back. You are disturbing the unit. He glared at me, his jaw tightening. "Rodriguez," he muttered, testing the name. He didn't make the connection. To him, Rodriguez was just a common game. I was just a face in the crowd he had trampled on his way to the top. "Fine, but if anything happens to her, I will bury you." "She's stable, Mr. Booker. The only threat to her recovery right now is stress. Go to the waiting room. We will call you when she wakes up." I turned on my heel and walked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. He hadn't recognized me. Not yet, but he would, and when he did, the war would begin. The next 3 days were a lesson in patience. Brittany's recovery was slow but steady. I made my rounds with professional detachment, checking her incisions, monitoring her blood work, and ignoring the way she looked at me. She was groggy, on heavy pain medication, and hadn't put the pieces together either. However, Zachary was a constant, looming presence. He was there every morning and every evening, questioning every decision, criticizing every nurse. He had already filed 2 formal complaints against the nursing staff for insubordination. On the 4th day, I was summoned to the office of Mr. Richardson, the hospital administrator. Richardson was a good man, but he was a man who bowed to money, and Zachary Booker was nothing if not money. I walked into the office to find Richardson looking pale and sweating. Zachary was sitting in the leather chair opposite him, looking smug. "Dr. Rodriguez, please sit down," Richardson said, gesturing nervously. I remained standing. "I have rounds in 10 minutes, sir. What is this about?" Zachary spoke before Richardson could. "This is about your incompetence, doctor." I looked at him calmly. "My incompetence? Your fiancée came in with a ruptured spleen and a hemothorax. She is currently sitting up and eating Jell-O. I'd call that a success." "You were rude to me," Zachary said, leaning back and crossing his legs. "You were dismissive, and I have done some digging. You're new here, hired from Chicago. You think you can come into our town and talk down to the people who own it?" "I answered to the medical board and the Hippocratic Oath, Mr. Booker, not to the donor committee." "Richardson," Zachary barked, turning to the administrator, "I told you I don't like her attitude. She's bad for morale. I want her off Brittany's case, and frankly, I think you need to reconsider her contract." Richardson sighed, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Zachary, please, Dr. Rodriguez is one of the best trauma surgeons in the state. We were lucky to get her." "I don't care," Zachary stood up. "I want her gone. If she isn't fired by the end of the week, the check for the new pediatric wing doesn't clear. Do I make myself clear?" The silence in the room was suffocating. Richardson looked at me with pleading eyes. He was being held hostage by a checkbook. I looked at Zachary. This was it. This was the moment I had feared, but also the moment I had prepared for. He was doing exactly what he had done 10 years ago, using his power to displace someone he viewed as lesser. "Mr. Booker," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "you seem to be under the impression that you can bully me. That might work on the administration, but it won't work on me." Zachary laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. "Bully you? Honey, you have no idea. I can ruin your life with a phone call. I can make sure you never practice medicine in this state again." "Like you ruined Gianna Rodriguez's life?" The name hung in the air. Zachary froze. His eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "Gianna Rodriguez," I repeated slowly. "The girl whose locker you filled with garbage. The girl you started a rumor about, that she was stealing drugs from the nurse's office, which led to her expulsion. The girl whose father was fired from your father's factory because you didn't like the way she looked at you." Zachary stared at me. He looked at my face, really looked at it, stripping away the white coat, the makeup, the confidence. He looked for the frightened girl from the trailer park. "You," he whispered. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "No, it can't be. Gigi? Little dirt-poor Gigi?" "Dr. Rodriguez," I corrected him again. Zachary began to laugh, but this time it was manic. "This is rich. This is absolutely rich. The little charity case came back playing doctor. Richardson, did you know? Did you know your chief of surgery is trash from the wrong side of the tracks?" "Dr. Rodriguez is highly qualified," Richardson began. "She's a fraud." Zachary slammed his hand on the desk. "And now it all makes sense. You have a vendetta. You're taking it out on Brittany. That's why you're being so cold. That's why you're mistreating her." "I saved her life," I said, "and the only person mistreating anyone here is you." Zachary walked up to me, his face inches from mine. "You think you've won because you got a degree? You're still nobody, and I am going to destroy you. I'm going to tell everyone who you really are. I'm going to dig up every skeleton in your closet. By tomorrow morning, you'll be begging to leave town just like you did 10 years ago." He stormed out of the office, slamming the door so hard the framed diplomas on the wall rattled. Richardson slumped in his chair. "Gianna, is it true? Do you have a history with him?" "He bullied me in high school, Mr. Richardson. He made my life a living hell, but that has nothing to do with my ability to be a surgeon." "I know," Richardson said, looking defeated. "But he's the chairman. He has the ear of the entire board of directors. He calls a meeting, and if he wants you gone, I don't know if I can stop him." "Let him call the meeting," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "In fact, I want him to." The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later. In that time, the atmosphere in the hospital became toxic. Zachary had spread the word. He told the nurses I was unstable. He told the other doctors I had falsified my credentials. He created a narrative where I was a vengeful woman out to hurt his beloved fiancé. I kept my head down. I focused on my patients, but there was someone I needed to talk to. "Joseph," I said, finding him in the break room. "I need a favor, a big one." Joseph Kim put down his coffee. "I heard the rumors. Booker is on a warpath. What do you need?" "I need the security logs from the ICU for the last 4 days. And I need the toxicology report on Brittany Cole from the night of the accident." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "The tox screen? Why?" "Because," I said, "Zachary Booker thinks he runs this town because he has money, but he forgets that in a hospital, everything is documented. He's been sloppy, Joseph. Arrogance makes people sloppy." Joseph stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll get them, but Gianna, be careful. He's dangerous." "I know, but so am I." The boardroom was located on the top floor of the hospital, overlooking the town that had once rejected me. The table was long, made of polished mahogany, and seated around it were 12 of the most influential people in the city. Richardson sat at the end, looking like a man marching to the gallows. Zachary Booker stood at the head of the table. He was in his element. He was charming, persuasive, and utterly venomous.
I walked in, holding a simple manila folder. The conversation stopped. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me. Some were curious, some were hostile. "Ah, the accused has arrived," Zachary said with a smirk. "Please take a seat, Ms. Rodriguez. We were just discussing the liability you pose to this institution." I remained standing. "It's Dr. Rodriguez, and I'd prefer to stand." Zachary turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, it has come to my attention that our new chief of surgery has a significant conflict of interest regarding my fiancée, Brittany Cole. Furthermore, her background is questionable. She has a history of instability. She was expelled from the local high school for theft and drug use. Is this the kind of person we want leading our surgical team?" Murmurs of dissent rippled through the room. "She has created a hostile work environment," Zachary continued, pacing the room. "She has been verbally abusive to me, a major donor. I am formally moving for her immediate termination." "Seconded," said a man I recognized as Zachary's uncle. "Is there any discussion?" Zachary asked, acting as if the vote was already decided.
"I would like to speak," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. Zachary rolled his eyes. "Make it quick. We have a hospital to save." I walked to the other end of the table, facing him. "You're right, Zachary. We do have a hospital to save, but the threat isn't me." I opened the folder. 10 years ago, I left this town because of lies. I swore I would never come back. But I did come back because I wanted to help people. I wanted to heal. And in the last month, I have performed 32 successful surgeries. I have reorganized the trauma protocol, reducing wait times by 15%. I looked at the board members. My record speaks for itself. But Mr. Booker's record, that is a different story. I pulled out a stack of papers. Mr. Booker claims I am a liability, yet this is the security log from the ICU. It shows Mr. Booker entering the restricted supply room 3 times in the last 2 days. Zachary's face twitched. "I was looking for a nurse. In the secured narcotics locker?" I asked. The room went deadly silent. I held up another paper. "This is an inventory log. We are missing significant quantities of Oxycontin. And this..." I held up a grainy photo printed from the security footage Joseph had retrieved. "This is Mr. Booker putting boxes of pharmaceuticals into his briefcase." "That's a lie!" Zachary shouted, his composure cracking. "Those are doctored." "And this," I continued, ignoring him, "is the toxicology report for Brittany Cole from the night of the crash. Mr. Booker insisted to the police that the crash was caused by bad road conditions, but Brittany's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit, and so was the passenger's." I looked directly at Zachary. "You were in the car, Zachary. The paramedics noted it in their field report, which you tried to have suppressed. You were driving. You switched seats with her because you have a prior DUI. You let your fiancé take the blame for a crash you caused, a crash that almost killed her." The board members were gasping now. Richardson sat up straighter, his eyes wide. "You forced her to take the fall," I said, my voice rising. "And while she was recovering, while I was stitching up the organ you ruptured with your reckless driving, you were stealing pain medication from the very hospital you claimed to support." "Shut up!" Zachary screamed. "Security, get her out of here." "No!" A voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there, leaning heavily on a walker, supported by Joseph Kim and a nurse, was Brittany Cole. She looked pale, frail, but her eyes were clear. "Brittany?" Zachary stammered. "Baby, you shouldn't be out of bed." "Don't call me that," she said, her voice raspy. She looked at me, then at Zachary. "She's telling the truth." Brittany hobbled forward a few steps. "He was driving. He was drunk. He told me if I didn't say I was driving, he'd leave me. He'd cut off my family. I was scared." She looked at the board members.
"And the pills. He's been addicted for years. He uses the hospital donations to cover his tracks." Zachary looked like a trapped animal. He looked at his uncle, who turned his face away. He looked at Richardson, who was now standing up, looking furious. "Mr. Booker," Richardson said, his voice shaking with rage, "I think we need to call the police." "You can't do this to me," Zachary yelled. "I am this hospital. I own you." You are a patient's visitor who has committed theft and fraud, I said calmly, and as chief of surgery, I am barring you from the premises. 2 security guards stepped forward. Zachary looked at them, then at me. The hate in his eyes was palpable, but beneath it, there was fear. For the first time in his life, his money couldn't buy his way out. You'll regret this, Rodriguez, he spat as the guards grabbed his arms. I don't think so, I said. As they dragged him out of the room shouting obscenities, the silence returned to the boardroom. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was the silence of a storm that had finally passed. Richardson cleared his throat. Dr. Rodriguez, Gianna, we owe you an apology. I closed the folder. No apology necessary. I just want to get back to work. I walked over to Brittany. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. This was the girl who had mocked my clothes, the girl who had laughed when I cried, but now she was just a broken woman who had been controlled by a monster. Thank you, she whispered, for the surgery and for this. Focus on getting better, Brittany, I said softly. You have a second chance. Don't waste it. The aftermath was swift. Zachary was arrested and charged with grand larceny and insurance fraud. The scandal rocked the town, but for once the gossip wasn't about the poor girl from the trailer park, it was about the fall of the golden boy. The board voted unanimously to keep me on as chief. Richardson even offered me a raise, which I accepted with a polite smile. A week later, I was scrubbing up for a routine appendectomy. Joseph was beside me, checking the monitors. You know, Joseph said, that was the most dramatic board meeting in the history of St. Jude's. You're a legend now. I don't want to be a legend, I said, pulling on my gloves. I just want to be a surgeon. Well, you're a surgeon who took down the biggest bully in town, Joseph smiled. How does it feel? I paused, looking at my hands. They were the same hands that had packed my bags 10 years ago, shaking with fear. Now they were steady, strong, capable of healing and capable of justice. It feels, I said, like the infection is finally gone. I looked at Joseph. Ready? Ready, he said. Scalpel. I stepped up to the table, the past finally behind me, and cut into the future.